Hello everyone, I'm Madiha. I'm a PhD student at University of North Carolina in Charlotte, and today I'm going to present our study on end user perceptions of smart home device manufacturer data practices and relevant risks. So, smart home market is growing very fast. People are getting more interested in having internet connected devices in their home for increased conveniences or increased security and safety. And in just last 1 year, the smart home market grown 12% only in US and expected to be a $40 billion business by 2020. And a lot of people in US has 2 or more smart home devices in their house. So, with the prevalence of these devices also comes many security and privacy risks, because these devices are actually automatically collecting a lot of potentially private information about its users. And because data is important, both tech companies and malicious parties are getting interested in these smart home devices, and we are seeing more and more attack on smart home and IoT devices regularly nowadays. So, there are some papers who looked at security and privacy in a smart home from end users perspective. For instance, Zhang et al. Conducted an interview study and found that even expert users have incomplete threat model of security and privacy risks in a smart home. And instead of sharing a common set of concerns, it is often limited and varied among the participants. There are another study who investigated 11 mostly technical users, focusing on their perception of specific data collection entities, and found that users' comfort on sharing their data depend on the benefit they get from the device and their trust on those entities. However, none of the previous work looked at that what the current users of these smart devices think about what happening with their data and what is their concerns and comfort in with these data collection and uses, and how that is affecting their behavior, security and privacy protection behavior. Also, the earlier studies mostly concentrated on expert users who installed and automated the smart home devices in their house, but not on the incidental users who were not involved in the installation and automation, but used these devices in a regular basis. So, in this study, we decided to get a more detailed and holistic understanding of both expert and non-expert users' perception of their smart home device manufacturer data practices. More specifically, what data do they think these smart home devices collect, where the data is stored, who can access that data, how that data is used, and how that perception is shaping their security and privacy concerns in a smart home, and how that is affecting their security and privacy actions to protect their data. So, to answer these questions, we conducted a semi-structured interview with 23 participants. It was a phone interview which lasted on average 1 hour. We recruited participants from IoT related online forums, from Reddit, and we recruited participants who has at least 3 types of smart home devices, because we wanted people who have experience interacting with different types of devices. So, we try to recruit a balanced sample of participants in terms of both age, gender, different technical background, and also people who are expert users involved in installation and automation, and also people who just use the devices as incidental users. So, our participants had a lot of different devices, and they used the smart home devices mainly for automating their household, to remotely sensing and controlling the devices, and increasing the security and safety of their house in some way. Some of the participants also mentioned they use these devices for saving energy and help with household chores. Most of the participants had some central controller set up, for instance, either SmartThings or a smart voice assistant. And for many of our participants, voice was the main method of interaction. So, as one of the goal of our study was to understand what people think about the data, we conducted a drawing exercise where we asked participants how they think the data is flowing in their smart home. So, we found that users' mental model depended on their technical background and their interaction with different devices. So, participants who had advanced mental model had a more detailed understanding of their smart home. All of those participants who had advanced mental model know about the cloud and the role of cloud in device interaction. They know that data goes back and forth between the devices and the cloud when the interaction happens. In contrast, the people who had service oriented model was mainly consist of how they control the device, that they control these devices with these devices. So, that's how the data flows. Some of them mentioned cloud, but none of them has a good idea of the role of cloud in device interaction. So, after that in the rest of our study, we asked participants more specifically about smart home manufacturer data practices. So, we found that the depth of people understanding of their smart home didn't actually affect their perception or understanding of smart home device manufacturer data practices. For instance, users' perception of data collection depended on the type of the device and their interaction with the device or the related app. For instance, the people who has video doorbell, all of them knew that the video doorbell is collecting video, but none of them mentioned that the app may be collecting their location when they are accessing the video. All of the participants knew that their interaction and uses may be collected by the device manufacturers, but again they were not really concerned. So, we looked more specifically at audio and video data because they normally seemed as more sensitive, and the video was still considered very sensitive by our participants. But our participants found practices to become comfortable around those devices. For instance, one of our participants said he just turned on the recording when he is not home, or some said that they only use the video camera in live streaming mode, so none of the video gets recorded. Our participants also mentioned that sensitive information can be inferred from the data these devices are collecting, and that information can be used for building advertising model for them and targeted advertising. But they are not very concerned. They say that targeted advertising becomes so common or kind of an integral part of their life that they think that it's kind of a cost of using the internet. Our participants also mentioned that the companies collect this data to improve the product. For example, if there is an error, if something is not working, the company collect that data and use that data to resolve the problem. And also they said that they use that data to identify users' need to develop new product. Our participants know that device manufacturers share their devices with third-party advertisers, but they are not really sure the extent of data that being shared. So, some things that only demographic data is being shared, some things that only small companies share the data, big companies do not share the data, they collect the data from small companies. Our participant mentioned that their data is going to the device manufacturer server or the cloud, and some of them also mentioned that the device manufacturers may not have enough protection in place in the cloud. And they were also not sure about how long the data will be stored. Most of them think that the data will be stored indefinitely, and many of our participants also were not aware of the security and privacy controls that are available in many of the smart home devices, and that make our participants uncomfortable. For instance, one of our participants didn't want echo in her house because she thought that there is no option to check the audio recordings and remove that data, and that make her uncomfortable that she wanted to remove the device from her house. After learning about their perception of device manufacturer data practices, we asked them what can happen to them based on what is happening to their data. So the participant mostly said that yes, there can be a data breach in the cloud and their data can be hacked. Some also said that the device can be hacked and remotely controlled by the adversary. Some were also said that there can be improper sharing between different companies, and as a consequence, their physical security can be hampered. There can be more risk of identity theft. Some advanced participants also mentioned that with this data, the companies can some way manipulate their decision or perception of things, and some also mentioned discomfort around the surveillance, especially around the devices that collect audio and video data. Our advanced users identified more threats, but again, only a few were really concerned. So instead of they are not really concerned, they actually conducted some protective measures. So for many of our participants said like they self-censored themselves in some way around the devices. So for instance, they turn off the device when they don't use the device, or do not use certain device functionality, or just put fake data in their account. And some also said they changed their behavior around these devices. Many of our participants use technical best practices that they know from other competing contexts. For example, they say that they use a strong password and two-factor authentication. Some of our expert participants said that they install some kind of tool to protect their data. For instance, 2 of our expert participants mentioned that they installed a local server and customized the devices to work with the server so their data do not go outside in the internet. But majority of our participants said they either use some technical mitigations or changing their behavior in some way around that devices to as a protective measure, and also mentioned that they are not really concerned about the threats, and mentioned a number of reasons why they are not concerned. So one of the reasons is they said that there is no way other than accepting this trade-off. If they want to use that device, they have to accept the risks. Some also said that they trust that the manufacturer will not misuse their data because it will be financially, it will damage their reputation and not be financially very profitable. Some was very optimistic that they will never be a target because they are not solvent enough, and some judges their risks by how exposed they already are. So they said that there is already enough information about me in the internet, so adding a new smart home devices will not increase my risk of identity theft. Some trusted that there is a strict regulatory body who will look over their data and make sure that the companies are not misusing their data. And some expert participants mentioned the difficulty of implementing protective actions like implementing a local server, and that cost of protective action is so high, it's often overrun the limited concern of the participant. So from our study, we learned that users' perceptions of device manufacturer data practices is not much different from their perception of internet, and this knowledge also don't affect their security and privacy behavior in a smart home. For instance, our expert participants did know about more threats and more protective measures, but still they didn't actually implement it. Instead, their protective behavior depend on their own biases and their concern with general internet users. Our participants' concerns was also paradoxical. For instance, they knew that these devices are collecting sensitive data. Sensitive data can be inferred. The companies may not have enough protection in the cloud, or there may not be enough regulatory bodies. But again, when we ask them why they are not concerned, they are kind of backing it up with the fact that they trust the company will not misuse their data. There are regulatory bodies who will look over their data. And this can be explained by learned helplessness, where people ignore negative outcome because they don't have control. And many of our participants explicitly say they don't have any controls. Once the data get into the device, it's out of their hand. So they use different coping mechanisms so data don't get into the device in the first place. For many of our participants, the estimated risk from these devices was also very low. Because, for instance, they know that their physical security can be hampered, but they thought that they will never be a good target. They know that there can be identity theft, but they thought that there is already enough information in the internet, so if someone wants to target me, the information is already out there. Even the people who had a victim of identity theft told that they have enough protection in their financial account, so they are good. So they don't understand the breadth of the risks that can come from smart home devices. And lastly, the lack of awareness of the available controls actually impede users and make the participants more uncomfortable. And from our interview, it was appeared that if they knew about these controls, their protective behavior may change in some way. So this underscored the importance of more studies to examine the nudges that drive users, especially the non-installer of these devices, towards the security and privacy controls that is already available with the devices. So with that, I'll finish my talk and happy to answer your question.
There's some time for questions.
Hi, so I'm Jonathan Zunger. I'm at Humu, but I actually used to head infra and privacy for the Google Assistant, so thank you very much for this talk. I had a question about the interpretation of this data. You were saying how people are making fairly low estimates of the risk and that they're ignoring certain types of hazard and so on. How do we tell whether, when we're looking at this, we're seeing at security fatigue or privacy fatigue versus people actually making fairly sophisticated risk-reward trade-offs? Because in the same interviews you were talking about, looking at this data, it also looked like people had pretty complex understandings of where their data was, how it could potentially be used, and had actually been making decisions deliberately. How do we know what's the right way to read this?
So, so that was one of the interesting findings we had from our data, that yes, we thought that people don't know anything, so maybe that's why they are not doing anything. But actually people know that, okay, they have complex model that, yes, that is happening to my data, yes, sensitive information can be inferred from my data. Still, they don't think that that can directly affect them because they don't think them as a potential victim or potential target for whatever data that are available.
But it sounded like they were enumerating various ways it could affect them.
What?
It sounded like they were enumerating risks of identity theft, physical security. I mean, a lot of...
Yes. Yeah, they worried about, like, as I said, they worried about identity theft, but again, they have, multiple of our participants said they already have protection of their final data, financial data. So they thought that, okay, that will be enough. Like if someone want to break into my bank account, then I would know. But they know about the risks, but they also have reasons that why I will not be concerned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So you mentioned that many of your participants were not aware of privacy controls that some of these devices had, and you also said that some of them had wrong mental models of either the protections or the regulations that were in place. And you mentioned nudges at the end, so I was just wondering, have you thought more about how people help have more accurate mental models or make them aware of privacy controls that might be useful to them?
So if people know about the privacy controls, from my experience with my participants, I think it will be helpful for them. Because many of our participants, when I told them that this is actually available, like with this device, and then they told me that if I would know that, I would remove my video. I would look at the audio recordings and delete it, and may not be this much uncomfortable. Like one of our participants actually removed the Nest camera for her house at some point because she got really uncomfortable with that device. So I think if people know about these controls, that would help them get more comfortable around these devices and use more privacy protective behaviors.
And do you have any ideas how we could make that happen beyond you going and visiting every user of a device?
So that's another problem, because the ecosystem is very complex. So each people have different types of devices, and different devices has different types of policies, provide different types of controls. So as a future step for our study, right now we are investigating what are the controls that are available in different set of devices, and what people's perception of those controls, how people use those controls, and what their needs. So it's kind of a future step.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. Let's thank our speaker.